to describe the president's daughter and advisor last week. It is a word I have used on the show many times, hoping to reclaim it. This time, I used it as an insult. I crossed the line. I regret it, and I do apologize for that.
Samantha Bee back on the air last night. The comedian saying she regrets the controversy, distracted from the immigration issue she was trying to put a focus on. Adrienne Elrod, former director of strategic communications for Hillary Clinton. Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com, Fox News contributor and co-host of the Benson and Hart Fox radio show. And Guy, I mean, your resume just gets longer and longer. So slow down, my man. Guys, here's what I want to know. The standards are different in 2018. We can agree on that. The line of offense is it's a lot lower than it used to be. You know, Roseanne lost a show because she insulted African Americans, and you can argue that she rightfully lost that show, or you can make a case that this was her First Amendment right. Samantha Bee insulted women all over the world, and she still has her program. Adrienne, should she?
Yeah, I think she should. And I think, unfortunately, what's been lost in this whole debate here is why she made those comments in the first place. First of all, I want to make it clear that I think there's no appropriate place to use the word that she used to describe Ivanka Trump, and that was terrible, and I'm glad she apologized. But she also made this comment because she's very concerned about what's happening at the border. She thought that Ivanka Trump posting a photo of her child when thousands of children are being ripped away from their parents at the border seeking asylum, did not need to use the word. But I think there's a big difference between Roseanne making extremely racist comments about Valerie Jarrett versus what Samantha Bee was doing here.
What's the difference? Because I see it as there's a new standard in America today.
There is a new state. Well, first of all, let's be clear that President Trump has been using derogatory language during the campaign and still as president of the United States. A lot of this comes from the top.
I want to get Guy in here. Voters can make that decision to fire him if they so choose when is the appropriate time. But my only conclusion to both of you is that what she said was okay with the bosses who employ her. Guy, go.
Yeah, so with Roseanne, she compared a woman of color to an ape, which is, short of the N-word, maybe the worst thing you can say in contemporary American life. So I understand why she was fired. It could have been her First Amendment right to say whatever she wants, and it is, but there are also consequences. I don't like people losing their jobs over objectionable speech generally. I think overt racism is a pretty bright line. But while I look at the situation involving Samantha Bee, I was not an advocate for her getting fired, but maybe getting suspended, something more than a tiny slap on the wrist where she put out a statement, TBS applauded her for apologizing, and then put her immediately back on the air to give that apology last night that was really deflecting and smug and sneering, which is kind of her default setting, where she said, oh, I didn't want to hurt anyone except for Ted Cruz. By the way, my apology does not apply to men. I don't care what they think. This is all a distraction from the real thing that should have been the issue, and that's the media's fault. It didn't feel very contrite to me.
How about that, Adrienne? Do her bosses not necessarily disagree with her comment?
Well, I actually do agree with Guy here that perhaps a suspension was more appropriate. But, you know, again, Samantha Bee was not... there's a huge difference, bottom line, between making very racist comments, which, by the way, Roseanne has done for years. This is not an isolated incident. Sam Bee using a very horrific term to describe a woman. But again, the underlying message here that she was trying to portray was the insensitivity of Ivanka Trump posting a photo of her child.
There was nothing insensitive about that.
When there are so many horrific things that are happening at the border.
Is what she said any less offensive to women? That
Samantha Bee, using the C word?
Where I come from, that's the last word you use.
I think it's extremely offensive, but I also agree with Guy here that you can't get much more offensive than making racist comments and comparing Valerie Jarrett to an ape.
Guy, is what she said any less offensive to women?
I mean, I'm not a woman, so I know that those types of words land on people's ears differently. All I can say is the justification that she was all upset about the immigration issue and illegal immigrant children being separated from their families as any kind of excuse for dropping the C-bomb on Ivanka Trump, I think is a very weak excuse. And to be honest, she was triggered by this photo of Ivanka with her own child. Like, people want Ivanka not to post a photo of her hugging her own kid. I think that's a little bit silly. And frankly, when you go back and look at the harangue, the original harangue from Samantha Bee, she was trafficking in quasi and half-truths, blaming those, looking at those photographs that turned out to be from 2014. She was saying that there were 1,500 kids who had been lost or missing. That isn't really accurate. So I know that she's upset that she distracted from, quote unquote, the real issue. But guess what? If you have a real issue and then you tack on to the end, by the way, the president's daughter's the C word, yeah, that's going to be a distraction.
Different standards for different people. Adrian, Guy, thank you.
Thanks,
Bill.
Appreciate the discussion.